Hello, everyone. We're so glad you could be here with us today. Welcome to Inclusive Research, Mastering Multilingual Communication, hosted by Fuel Cycle and Multilingual Connections today. We are going to delve into some best practices for multilingual research and client communications, and we'll walk through the critical importance of conducting research in the native language of your stakeholders to obtain high quality insights and foster genuine connections. We'll also address some of the pitfalls of relying solely on English and the challenges and costs of multilingual projects and effective strategies for managing budgets and timelines. My name is Polly Sparrows. I'm the Chief Revenue Officer at Fuel Cycle, where we have technology that connects you to any audience, provides advanced insight capabilities, and helps our customers deliver confident business decisions. I will ask our panelists to introduce themselves. I'll start with my colleague, Kevin.
Hello, everyone. My name is Kevin Rowe. I'm the Vice President of Research and Insights at Fuel Cycle. And in my day-to-day, we're building insights communities and audience networks all around the world to support the broad spectrum of research objectives for our clients and partners, whether that's US-based or anywhere overseas as well.
Jill, you want to take it over?
Hi, everybody. And first of all, Polly and Kevin, thank you so much for having us. I'm Jill Bishop, founder and CEO of Multilingual Connections, a Chicago-based language and culture consultancy that I founded with the focus of creating connections across the globe. And that has changed tremendously over the 20 years that we've been working. But that core focus of helping create meaningful connections has been the constant throughout our 2 decades.
Hi, everyone. I'm Carlos Avia, the Director of Business Development here at Multilingual Connections. My role is fundamentally to connect our clients with the right expertise for the type of project they've got to work on, whether that's linguistic consulting or research moderation or other language services that we provide. It's all about creating partnerships and finding the right expertise for the content that you're looking for.
Thank you so much, Kevin, Jill, and Carlos, for being with us today. It's a big topic. We'll never get through all of it, but let's go ahead and jump in. So, our world is becoming bigger and bigger and smaller, and we see so many multinational brands looking to do research across the globe. So let's just go ahead and get started. Jill, can you start us off? Can you start by talking about the importance of conducting research in the native language, kind of what that means, and how we enhance the quality of insights to foster our authentic connections?
Absolutely. So 25 years ago, I was conducting my doctoral research in linguistic anthropology, which looks at the intersection of language and culture. And I specifically was looking at speakers of a dying language. And one speaker of this language noted that his language wasn't just a language, but it was a travel agency. And through my observations and conversations in the field that year, I really saw how language could connect people across time and space. And I looked at what people did with language, but also through language, how they expressed their repertoire of identities, how they connected to their roots and to each other, how they created shared experiences and made sense of their past and their present. And so at Multilingual Connections, that understanding of the power of language is what guides us and the approach that we take to working with our clients to connect with their global customers, whether that's for translation, bilingual moderation, transcription, linguistic consulting, any of the services that we do in about 75 different languages. And we understand that language isn't just a tool for communication, but it's a bridge to creating deeper emotional and cultural understanding. And so with that in mind, we believe it's essential to give people a choice when it comes to language. And so, in the US, there used to be the joke that's less relevant today, but that what do you call somebody who speaks 3 languages, multilingual, 2 languages, bilingual, and 1 language, American? That was a shot at Americans with our historical approach to language and language teaching to our kids. That's a little bit less relevant today as we become a much more global and diverse society. But around the world, in many countries, people grow up speaking multiple languages, one at home, one at school, one with their grandparents, one at work. And so there's such a tapestry of language. And when we're doing research and trying to really connect with people on an authentic level, it's important that we do that in a language of their preference and not our own. And so sometimes we might think it's one language, but it's actually the other. And so understanding who our participants are, what their particular preferences are, and how can we get most flexibly and authentically connected with them is the key to getting those authentic and meaningful insights.
Yeah, I'm going to follow up with one question, which is, so a respondent receives an opportunity to engage in a research activity. Would they ever forego participating if it weren't in their native language? And in addition, can you talk a little bit about confidence levels in terms of nuance? You mentioned nuance when a respondent is engaging with a research activity.
Absolutely. So one of the most important things when we do a translation, it's not just a one word for one word type of correlation. There's so much more in terms of linguistic and cultural resonance that's important to take into account. But then there's also localizing, making sure that you're tailoring the content to your participants. And so, making sure that when somebody reads a document, a website, an app, a survey, if that reads like it was translated and not written specifically for them, it can be a little jarring. It can make people feel like, why is this company, why do they not care about me enough to take the time, spend the money to translate this professionally? If it comes off sounding a little clunky or as if it weren't written for them, it can really be off-putting. And so there's that side, kind of the emotional reaction to it. But then there's also the more practical side that maybe they don't exactly understand the nuance of the question. Or on the other side, maybe they can't express with the nuance that their response requires how they truly feel about something. So you're really missing an opportunity when you're not giving them that chance to express themselves either in their native language or the language that they prefer for that context.
Thank you. So Carlos and Kevin, any commentary on nuance and how and its essentialness? Like, because human nuance, especially in an era of AI, we're all very curious. Cultural resonance, inclusive language. Kevin, we talk at work a lot about just the scarcity of respondents and how difficult it is to find the right respondent for the right targeting. So I'm curious, Carlos or Kevin, either of you, any comments on what Jill shared?
I can go first. I think that you're absolutely right. I think that when we have audiences or individuals who are interested in participating, we have to make sure that we're treating that experience like it's gold, right? Like it's meant for them. And so any little hiccup or little framing difference could mean the difference between them completing or not. And I'll go back to what Jill was saying earlier about kind of the emotional aspect of this. I think that so much of what we do for our stakeholders, for our partners, is storytelling. And that storytelling is very difficult when you're not getting the context and the nuance and the deep understanding of why someone is saying something a specific way. Those details actually matter. So not necessarily just the word-to-word translation, but what is it really that they're trying to express, and how should we interpret that to make sense of a broader finding or an insight?
And what they're willing to express when speaking in one language versus the other. I had kind of a weird aha moment a number of years ago. I was working with my French boss who had hired me in English, where our language of choice was between us was English, and I was managing a team of people in Spain at the time. And she came to visit after I'd been working for the company for about 4 or 5 months, and we went out to dinner. And at the end of the dinner, she said, "Hey, I never met the Spanish Carlos. He's a different guy." And I realized that she said, he laughs more, he jokes more, he's more emotional, right? And I remember I knew that I was a little bit different in one language versus another, but it wasn't until that moment that I realized, no, I'm perceived as a different person by someone who knows me pretty well. And so, what
And
you
Carlos, I
share
love
and
that
how,
story. Oh, sorry to overlap.
no,
But
go ahead.
I love that story because the exact opposite for me living in Spain, I was Gil. I wasn't Jill. And Gil was this shy person who couldn't tell a joke and didn't connect with her friends the way that she wanted to because I was trapped in this in with my linguistic limitations. And I was reading Don Quixote in Spanish. I was studying pre-Socratic philosophy in Spanish. I was doing all these classes and coursework in Spanish and writing papers, but I couldn't just hang out with people and be myself. And it really prevented me from feeling connected in the way that I wanted to. And with that in mind, we did Carlos and I talked to our team who they're from 10 different countries around the world about who they are in translation and if they feel like they're different people in different languages. And it was really interesting to hear that some people feel like they're more polite in one language than the other. Someone else feels like they have a more optimistic way of thinking in one. A friend who's from Germany said she would never be able to do therapy in German. She could only do it in English, even though she's a native German speaker. It wouldn't feel right to talk about these things in German. And so it's when you really dive in, and obviously for a linguistic anthropologist and translation agency owner, this is fascinating. And maybe it's not as fascinating for everybody else, but if you're working in this world, if you're working in global research, it should be at least a little bit, because this is the difference. This makes all the difference. This is where the interesting stuff is between the words and between the sentences, that level of nuance that really can make all the difference.
So you talked, is it relevant to research? We talk to customers all the time, and we are finding that qualitative is becoming more and more important because brands need to understand the why, right? We can understand the what, we can understand the where. The why is important in order to make sure that they can bring their customers and new prospects into their ecosystem, understanding the why. So really what we've understood from our brands needs, we work with large brands around the world. They're very interested in understanding the why. And for research teams, helping senior leadership understand the consumer, understand their customer, the qualitative aspect of that interaction, those research engagements is really, really important. And I think that we've surfaced a very important aspect, which is often probably overlooked, and that is, human connection, whether it's with a brand or whether it's with a product or an activity. It really is a very personal experience, and that personal experience requires a personal story, as Kevin mentioned. And so, can our respondents, our informants, can they tell that story in the most comfortable way, in the most familiar way, where they can truly express themselves? So very, very interesting. I think we got a little deeper on that than we thought we would. So let's go ahead and move on to kind of this next piece, which we wanted to explore. And Kevin, we'll pitch this to you. So, the reality is we're all doing research and we're all very busy and we don't have unlimited budgets, unfortunately. And so what are some strategies, for managing the challenges and costs of multilingual research, and, choosing the right partners, making sure you decide when you need to bring in the right partner, managing budgets and timelines? Can you speak a little bit to some of the ways that we can absorb the challenges and overcome them?
Yeah, I think I'll try and break that question down maybe into two separate parts, both in terms of my experience. I think, it starts with building relationships with partners well in advance of a project. I think that we've sometimes gotten into some trouble with, oh, who's available? How do we get this done? And we're working on competing timelines and budget and whatnot. So making sure that you really understand a partner's capabilities, their specialization, what the turnaround times could be, and the way that they have cost structures is extremely important. And I think the next step beyond that is even beyond selecting the right partner, it's making sure that that information is broadly available to your entire team, right? Oftentimes you get into these maybe specific clients or specific projects where they have experience working with some of our partners, but that information isn't broadly shared. So you need to make sure that your entire team knows who to reach out to, who are the main points of contact, as well as the performance, right? The history, who have they supported, and how does that make sense in the context of the project that you're working on? I think importantly, selecting the right partner really comes down to the consultation and comfort that you feel with that partner. In managing translation, it's not just about a questionnaire. It's not just about an open end. I think it sometimes comes down to the bigger picture, right? Are they going to be there with you to kick off a project, to understand the context, to understand your hypothesis and your goals? Because all of those things, it's not just a task-oriented execution, right? Where sometimes it can be a race to the bottom. I think finding that partner who is willing and able to sit with you and to think with you and to brainstorm with you makes all the difference in the world in terms of an output, right? In terms of what you're able to turn around.
Kevin, I don't think Carlos and I can nod our heads strongly enough as you're talking, because it's just that partnership point is so important. And oftentimes people think of translation as a transaction, and it can be. But if you want to do it well, and if you want to do it efficiently, and you want to make sure this is a scalable process, having that partnership exactly like you're describing is so important. We can take advantage of past translations and translation memory. We understand how you work. We've got the workflow set. We've got the right people on the ground, the right teams because it's not just, oh, we need a Spanish translator, let's just find somebody. It's a professional translator who is a native speaker of the language and the region and has the industry expertise and the software requirements and understands your voice. Being able to ask you questions about tone and intention and code and so many different things that go back and forth between our project managers and yours, that's just all a part of it. And when people think that translation is just, shooting it through MT or ChatGPT or just uploading a file to an online site that happened to be a penny less per word, you're missing out on that ongoing relationship and development and long-term scalability of this process.
Definitely. I think even between us, just being able to make sure that the question that we want to ask is going to get us the result that we're intending, right? So did we frame this question the right way? It's not something that you're going to get from being able to plug it into maybe a cheap solution, right? Because I think that you only get one shot with a lot of respondents. Again, going back to, we have to make sure that we're treating them with the utmost respect, with making sure that they have the best experience. The way that we ask questions as well is so important. And I'll just say, I think that, I had mentioned context. I think being able to sit and work through what the hypothesis is, to sit and work through what the history of the project has been, or other products or other experiences in country that we've had. And I think it's that exchange of information that just makes things so much stronger in the end. In terms of costs, I think, it's definitely worth considering. What is the ideal outcome and what is the weight that we're looking to kind of put behind a project? I think more and more, if we understand kind of generally the cost structure, that can be built in a lot easier than trying to add it after the fact. And so I would highly recommend, especially if there are people on this webinar who haven't necessarily done a project in country or in language, or maybe it's something new for them, to have a trusted partner sit with you, to ride side by side with you, and to be that thought partner in your experience. It's worth it. It's worth every penny.
One of the things, Kevin, both you and Jill mentioned is the word scalability. It's something that I get stuck with quite a bit when I'm thinking about partnerships for multicultural, multilingual, multinational research. A research project is already sort of complex enough. It has enough moving parts. And then you throw in 7 cultures, 7 languages, 7 markets. Maybe it's 7 languages and 10 markets, but you throw in that extra complexity. Now, how do you scale that properly? And I think that displacing that, having a partner that you can work with that is capable of managing all the moving parts. So whenever, in your case, your client changes a survey at the very last minute, and now they want to propagate that across 7 languages in 24 hours. How does that get done without a mad scramble on your part? Well, you rely on people who do that, unfortunately or fortunately, every day. And I think that scalability and efficiency that Jill was talking about is super important.
Yeah, I'll just add too, if I may, that research in general is a moving target. It is, things go sideways when conducting research projects. And Carlos, you mentioned adding a change, whether it be a programming change or a discussion guide change at the last minute. And if that means that you have to make these changes across numerous, whether it's versions of the survey or versions of the project, having a partner that helps you make sure you're doing it right if you're going to do research and if you're going to make the investment in the project, it makes sense to make the investment in doing it right, because research in general, when you're dealing with audiences, are wrought with potential pitfalls without the complexity of a multilingual aspect to it. And I think that the kind of trust and peace of mind that a mature, experienced partner can offer to that project. I always say I'd rather disappoint you on the way into the project than on the way out. Because if you go ahead and make those changes and take those expenses without the partner, you're running the risk of having bad data. And that's worse than really, not having done the project. Some people will say bad data is worse than not having data, right? Because you could really make some bad decisions. So I don't know if anybody has any comments about any of that, but we can move on to Jill, did you have anything?
Yeah, one thing I wanted to bring about making sure your communications are inclusive. And so that's something that I know it's a major focus for so many of us, making sure that we're using gender inclusive language in our content, in our surveys, in our reporting, and our advertising. It can be complicated enough in English, but we get requests from clients, here, can you translate these into 7 languages and make sure it's all gender neutral? It doesn't work that way across all languages. Some languages are so gendered that you can't have a verb that doesn't have a gender. You can't have an adjective that doesn't have a gender. It's so difficult to extricate gender from the language. And so you can really run some risks of making serious mistakes by either overdoing it or underdoing it and not knowing what you're doing, essentially. If you're not a native speaker of this language who is up to date on everything that's happening around gender and translation in that country, you can really burn some bridges. And so that's just another very specific but very important example of where having professionals who understand the implications of every word choice can make all the difference.
Mm-hmm.
It comes down to how important is the quality of your research. I mean, it's only as important as the lead researcher really wants to commit themselves to. How important is quality research? Very excellent commentary. Thank you. So Carlos, I'm gonna pitch this question to you. We do communities at FuelCycle. One of the audiences that we work with quite a bit is community. So I'm curious, and you also have provided community support and insight across the globe, not only for FuelCycle but for other clients too. Can you share some best practices for maintaining an engaged insight community by nurturing members in their own language? So if you have like a multinational community, multiple communities in different languages, promoting trust and inclusivity, as we've discussed before.
So it's so important to get this right, because in the end, a participant in your research, mostly unconsciously, not knowingly, is going to ask themselves the question, whether it's a survey or any other instrument you're using, they're going to ask themselves the question internally, was this made for me? Or am I an afterthought? Is this something that's been adapted to me, right? And again, this is not happening on a conscious level. And likewise, that is going to give them the answer to their own question of how much am I willing to share with you? You talked earlier probably about the importance of getting to the why, whether it's quantitative or qualitative. In the end, there is a whole thing that's going on underneath the surface of any participant of how much do I trust these people and how much am I willing to share with them? So getting over the hurdle of whether this was made for me is the most important hurdle you need to get over. So a good example would be asking questions in a way that resonates and feels natural to a given participant. In Japan, for example, you wouldn't ask them, do you live with your parents or with roommates? You would ask them, do you live with parents or with friends? Because conceptually, in Japanese culture, they're not going to conceptualize just living with friends. What does that mean exactly? With roommates. With friends, yes. Roommates is a foreign concept. They wouldn't just go and say, hey, Joe knows someone who can share the rent with us. I'm gonna live with that person, right? So just posing that question in that way, it makes a big difference. Asking them whether they're under the age of 18 versus under the age of 20, which is the age of consent in adulthood and in other cultures. So it's understanding those things. It's super important to make sure that you have localized the content, not just translated it. And it goes back to authenticity. Are you who you say you are? Are you someone who I can trust?
Excellent. Kevin?
I'll just add, I think that in building communities where you know that there are going to be different languages, different perspectives, starting from the beginning with that plan is really important. Making sure that you're asking their language of preference. What is it that they view themselves as, or how do they feel like communicating? And I'll plug our own technology here and having a dynamic and flexible profiling system that allows for them to potentially change that over time. Being able to identify those individuals and those groups and put them in conversations with each other with like-minded or similar groups is really important to foster that kind of dynamic and individualized engagement. So I think it comes down to, similar to my answer before, a lot of planning, a lot of forethought. How is it that I want to structure the engagement with my audiences, and how do I build something that is unique and or personalized for the member?
Jill, any comments on that, on building communities multilingual?
Yeah, I was going to mention that code switching is such an important part of the way that people in multilingual communities express themselves. And so those that speak multiple languages, they might have one language that they speak situationally and another in a different situation. But then there's also, it's called metaphorical code switching, where you switch to a different word, a different language because of its connotation and because it means something different in that moment. And so again, allowing the flexibility of for people to be able to express themselves in whatever language makes sense. We did moderation with another client and brought in a Hindi moderator for research, and they wound up using English. We thought they would use Hindi, as did he, but they wound up speaking primarily in English, but with code switching throughout. And so making sure that you have that flexibility when possible for multiple answers, multiple ways of expressing yourself, because words matter and the language of those words matter as well.
Thanks. I will also just add one commercial insight for community building. And one of the benefits of community building is that, you have a private online panel. You have a panel that you can go to. You do not want to alienate that panel. You want to make sure that they understand and feel that those research engagements coming to them were indeed, done well and with preparation and in the native tongue that they are interacting with and that they're purchasing your product with. So that's part of a retention strategy as well when you have multilingual communities as part of your research plan.
And probably that point about alienation, I'm sorry,
Yes,
is so important. And especially back to the idea of inclusivity, a great example of that is Latinx, which for many Latinos is exactly how they want to refer to themselves. But for others, it sounds like it's an externally imposed term that does not describe themselves and their identities. So if you don't know who your community is and you use terminology that you think is the right term, but without understanding from their side what they consider to be right, you can absolutely alienate and exclude the people that you're trying so hard to include.
And to retain, right? To keep. You
Absolutely.
want the idea, one of the ROIs of developing an online panel is that you don't have to go out into the wild and get respondents every time you want to do another research engagement. Really, really great stuff. We've covered, inclusivity. We've covered making sure that we keep the human nuance in the forefront. We've talked about making sure that we have relationships already in place in advance of project needs, which is, I think Kevin shared that, which is so important because difficult to get that lined up at the 11th hour when you have a research opportunity across multiple languages. And then, also finally making sure that we are aware of ways that we could potentially alienate our respondents in research communities. So really, really great, I think, great stuff to share with our audience today. And we are, of course, as I suspected, we're at time. But I want to throw out one more question to the panel. So we'll call this sort of like a lightning round. And so Jill, Kevin, Carlos, if you could leave our audience and attendees with kind of one thing that you'd like to leave them with in terms of how they can start driving inclusive research with multilingual audiences in their own, insights groups. We'll start with you. Jill, and then we'll go to Kevin, then Carlos. What would that one thing be that you'd like to leave
Sure.
our attendees with?
I'll focus for a second on AI, and it is, of course, incredible, amazing, shocking, exciting, scary, all that wrapped into one. And it has a lot of promise in terms of translation, but it is not ready for the wheels to be off when it really matters. And so our recommendation, we get questions all the time. Hey, I just sent this through MT or ChatGPT. Can you just clean it up and send it back? It's more than a cleanup process. It's a side-by-side editing to make sure that the content is accurate and that it reads naturally. And so there's so much human that's still necessary to make sure, and I'm not just saying that because it's what we do for a living, but it is absolutely true that the human insight and nuance and understanding of language is such an important part. So technology together with human skill is great, but you don't know what you don't know. So if you're just sending something through an engine and then kind of crossing your fingers, closing your eyes, and hoping for the best, it's risky. And so I strongly recommend, whether it's us or another professional agency, that you have a real professional set of eyes on anything that's going out in front of your communities.
Thank you, Jill. Kevin.
I think I have a two-part answer to this. I think the first is making sure that you're considering every single touch point, no matter how big or how small you might have with a specific audience. Making sure that you're considering whether it's going to read right, or they're going to understand it properly, or they have and feel comfortable responding. I think that was something that kind of came through in some of the other responses previously, but I think it's really important to reiterate. And I think the second is to spend time thinking about the background of the people and places that you want to conduct research in, culturally, historically, societally, whatever it might be. It doesn't take much to start reading and trying to understand who it is that you're engaging, right? We would do that for a US-based audience, based on any number of factors, but multinationally as well. I think it's important to really try and think about the respondent as 360, right? Beyond just a response on a page.
Yeah, I'm going to build on what Kevin just said. I think the most practical thing that most researchers can do is think about it early, right? Kevin, you said it a couple of times in this talk we've had today. Get on this, what you just mentioned, but get on it early on. One of the biggest situations that we encounter is the cleanup when it hasn't been thought of early enough. And basically what we're asked to do a lot of times is find imperfect solutions, right? The best way to avoid that situation is to think about this way early on. And I think we have some questions from the audience that we might, that I want to address one of them, and that is the second question that Ruben asked, which was about using AI to help when conducting conducting data analysis with a cultural filter or lens on, and can AI help yet in that endeavor? I don't often poo-poo AI. I'm actually a big a proponent of it, and I believe it has a lot of applications. But this is one area where I'm going to have to say not yet in this area. If you want to have a good feel for that, just ask AI any large language model to give you, let's say, whatever content you've asked it to generate an email or response to a client or something like that, and then say, can you put that in the voice of the typical Midwesterner, and see what kind of very, very, very cheesy response you get from the AI. You will see how it relies on just too many stereotypes to be able to provide any kind of real cultural lens. I don't think that that's the same case when it comes to some other things, but for sure in that area.
That is a great example that maybe some of us would not have come to understand if it's a learned language model, which means that it's learning stereotypes as well, and potentially slurs as well. So thank you,
Biases.
Carlos. That was a
Yeah.
great question. Thank you from our audience. When translation is in data collection, it's important to conduct data analysis while using a cultural filter or lens. Can AI help? Kevin, any watchouts for applying an AI lens on data analysis?
Well, I think Carlos really captured a lot of it. I think that especially when you're dealing with language that you don't necessarily know or speak, obviously, the output, there's no real good way to verify what you're seeing or what you're understanding. So you're essentially putting all of the trust in a system that is not yet perhaps mature enough, and there's no way to verify. So it's kind of a double-edged sword there. Like Carlos, I think that there's a ton of application for AI, and I think we're investing very heavily in that as a company. But I do think that the nuance and the specificity of understanding that audience isn't quite baked in yet. I've run multiple tests myself, and I've kind of had a similar experience to Carlos, where it kind of looks right on the face of it, but it doesn't really get you 100% of the way there.
Jill, there's a question for you specifically, which you mentioned the importance of word choice. How do you manage the use of terms like Latinx or Latin in identifying segments? Those terms seem to be more popular among certain segments of the marketing community that are external. Do you have
Yeah,
comments on?
it's so challenging. And unfortunately, the answer is it really depends. And it depends on who your community is, what their education level is, what their age level is, their immigration generation. There are so many factors. And so for some people, those terms are going to feel exactly right and natural. And for others, they hear it and they will think that you don't know a thing about them and who they are. So it's about asking questions and also potentially working with linguistic consultants to understand those nuances at who generally gravitates towards certain terms and who doesn't. And that's just one example, of course, but it goes back to that idea of inclusive language. We go into it perhaps with the best of intentions, but our intentions can wind up alienating and excluding the same people that we're trying to include if we don't understand who they are and what their goals are and how they identify themselves.
Yeah, similar to what Carlos says, was this written for me? Am I an afterthought too? I specifically remember saying that. Some really good questions. When building a multilingual insight community, what are the first steps you take to ensure inclusivity from the very beginning? Kevin Rowe, do you want to take a stab at this one?
Yeah, I think it kind of goes back to understanding all of the different touch points that you're going to have, right? From initial contact and invite or email, all the way through screener, profiler, and then what discussions and activities are available for them when they start. I think it's that first week, that first day is extremely important in setting the tone for what that member would expect moving forward. And so if you miss early, you're going to, see a much larger drop off over time than if it were kind of planned and thought through in the beginning. And I'll kind of piggyback on what Jill had said. I think it's really important to ask as well, and to ask questions about identity or about preference or about how they'd like to be referred to or grouped or understood. And I think that sometimes is a challenge too, because if you have an incorrect lens when starting things off, you may not be able to ask the full suite of questions and or identity-driven ways to understand the person, because you just don't know what you don't know. And I think that really is where having a great partner comes in it's such a benefit. I'll start with that.
Yeah.
I couldn't agree more, Kevin. I think that the world has gotten to be a smaller place, but that also because of communication tools that are available to us, even platforms like Fuel Cycle, for example, permit you to do things that you just couldn't do before. We had to make assumptions. I mean, the baseline of what I just heard you say is don't make any assumptions, ask, right? And I think that before you had to make assumptions, you had to lump. And that's where these biases really come from, is the need to lump people in together. Oh, they go to a gym, therefore they respond to bro. Oh, they're this age and they're from Mexico, so they will consider themselves Latinx. I think that's the wrong starting point. I think the right starting point is ask. And now you have platforms and tools through which it's easy, not easy, but at least efficient to ask those questions and get them answered before you go down that road.
100%.
Excellent. I have one for Jill and Carlos, because I think this is most appropriate for kind of your patch, which is what are some affordable or lower cost strategies for smaller organizations to begin conducting multilingual research without overextending their resources?
It's a great question. And my recommendation for clients that are on a budget is you don't have to do everything all at once. And so we would rather you do less and feel comfortable and start to see the ROI than go crazy and then, just kind of collapse under the weight, the logistical and the financial weight of it. So even if we believe in doing it all, it's important as your partner to support you in doing what you're able and willing to do at this point. And so translate a few languages or translate one survey, see how it goes, understand that workflow, because there are lots of parts and pieces and things you might not anticipate. So just get your feet wet with a little bit, and then you start to see the benefits of it. And then on the next study, you can do more languages. So it doesn't have to be, it's not always as expensive as you think it is. And it also doesn't have to be as overwhelming if you have the right person and the right team supporting you on the partnership side.
Yeah.
Carlos, any other thoughts on that?
Yeah, we get this question a lot from clients, actually. In particular, we do a lot of work in museums and cultural institutions, and many of them are nonprofit and on a very, very tight budget. And so the advice that we give them typically is think about how welcoming you are on the outset, right? So in the case of research, that might be the screener, for example. Make sure that their first point of entry with you, their first contact with you, is the most welcoming it can possibly be, and they again, under the skin, or under, maybe it's even subconscious, they say, "Oh, I belong here." Because once they feel that, "Oh, I belong here," you will get a lot more benefit of the doubt for things that you might not have the budget to translate or to do the full amount with, right? Because you've already earned that sort of social capital, that goodwill, by providing a welcome entry to your space. Whatever that means in research, that can mean a couple of different things. So
I think that's a great place to kind of finish off today, because as expected, we have reached time, and we could I know I could continue this conversation all afternoon. So Jill Bishop, Carlos, Kevin Rowe, thank you so much for being with us here today. I think we had a great, lively conversation, and this will be available. We're going to post this. I know that MLC will post this, Fuel Cycle will post this too, bits and pieces of it. But thank you for all of you who were with us today in our webinar. And great, have a great rest of the afternoon, and best of luck with your multilingual connections and your multilingual human connections. Thanks,
Polly, and thanks, Kevin, and thanks to the Fuel Cycle team. Take care, everybody.